Yep, I believe it's working. And what do I do here? Alright. Okay, so I reckon I can probably bring this back over here, out of the way. Okay, so we'll give this a crack. I'm just figuring this out as I go along, but so I'm here to have a chat to anybody that has any questions about the HRWL licensing. Every time I get home from work, I seem to be bombarded with questions, so I figured I would come online tonight when I've got a bit of a chance before I start a whole new week again, starting at the beginning. Alright, so don't know how this is going to go, but we'll just sort of wing it as we go because I'm figuring it out myself. I'm not really a tech head. Okay, alright, so what I will do is I will bring up some of the questions that I have been asked, and we'll sort of have a look at those while we're waiting for you people to come on, and hopefully someone might come up with a suggestion what they might want to know about. So while we're waiting, we will have a look at... Alright, we'll bring up some of the questions that I have been getting asked. Alright, now these are... just drag these over here. Okay, and I will switch over to here. So hopefully that's come up and you can see that alright. So these are just a few of the questions I've been dealing with. And look, not everyone is experienced. Everyone starts out somewhere and they do have things to know. And some questions don't always have a black and white answer either. So we'll take this first one for example, after the video of travelling uphill with a load. So I had someone come on board and ask me, does load weight come into consideration? So for example, a 300 kilo load on a crane with 15 tonne of counterweights on it. Now it's going to depend on the individual cranes. Typically I'd say best practice always travel with the load facing uphill. Now in saying that, it can depend on the type of crane you're driving as well. So for example, if you were driving a big crawler crane and you only had a short stick, you've got all that counterweight sitting on the back end of it, in which case they would typically reverse up. But if they were carrying a big load, then obviously the load is going to compensate for it. If it's just taking up a stillage scaff, obviously the counterweight on the back of that crane is going to way outdo that. Now the same crane, if you've got a long boom on it, you've got a long heavy boom on it, then that can come into effect as well. Alright, so but when you're starting out, and typically the people I deal with are students just getting into it to begin with. Sorry, just had a few little pop-ups come up there. Okay, so new students, if you're talking about a frenner, alright, so frenners typically will always travel uphill carrying the load. Okay, as will most cranes, alright. It's only those exceptional circumstances where you've got a big crane and you've got a very small load on it, and you may have a long boom extended for whatever reason. Alright, but a big crane with a short boom, alright, may occasionally reverse uphill. It's going to come down to manufacturer's requirements for each particular crane, but as a rule of thumb, always try and keep that load facing uphill. Okay, because they are all different. Alright, now this one's not a question so much as a comment. So someone says here, also use a closed fist for stop, because if you're upside down doing a lift as a doggy, open palm can mean down slow. Faster you wave your hand, the faster you want the winch to cable to go. Now, last part is true. If you want to come down quick, you can wave your hand a little bit quicker. As for a closed fist, don't relate it to rigging at all. Not in Australia anyway. Look, at the end of the day, as a crane operator, I understand that some riggers do use different signals. but the standard signal for stop is always a open hand. Okay, if I'm driving the crane and you do put up a fist, I will still stop because I do understand what you want, but it's better to stick to the typical standard. All right. Okay, now where are we? All right, so I'll leave out the expletives, but they're saying here, whistles are so bleep dangerous. I refuse to use them. Radio is good if it's only you and a doggy on the channel. Okay, all right. First question. All right. So, hi buddy, I'm a rigger and you're doing very well for all the new guys that they want to start this amazing and full of satisfaction. Good job. Cheers. Cheers, Michelle. Appreciate it. I'm glad people are getting out there and actually listening in. I found there's been a lack of resources and a lot of incorrect information on the internet, so that's the reason I'm doing it. Sort of some of my students were watching somebody else's videos, getting some wrong information, and I figured, well, if they're going to watch them, they may as well try and get the correct information in there. Makes it a lot easier to pass the assessments if you actually got the right information. Bit hard with the wrong information to pass the test. All right, so thanks for that, Michelle. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so last part of that question, totally agree with. So radio is good if only you and the doggy are on the channel, and it should only be you and the doggy on the channel. If you're using a crane, you should be using private channels. Now, I am well aware that plenty of companies out there, especially in the country, do tend to use open channels a lot. In the country, you can probably get away with it a fair bit more, but when you're in the city, there's that much traffic on the radios nowadays. You really want to make sure that you do have closed channel two-way radios, right? Because the last thing you want is some fool jumping in while you're in the middle of a lift, trying to give you wrong directions. All right. Not saying it's going to happen, but there is the possibility of it, and it's our job to reduce any possibilities of anything going wrong. All right. Now, as for the first part, that they're dangerous. Just like any piece of equipment, if you're trained properly and know how to use them, there is absolutely nothing wrong with using a whistle. They're actually quite handy, especially if you're doing steel work. You might be holding on with one hand, you've got a podgy in the other hand, and you still need to communicate with the operator. All right, so they do have a place, and they are a very good piece of equipment when you learn how to use them properly. I find most people that do have problems with or issues with using whistles is only because they haven't been trained with them and they don't have the experience using them. Now, personally on that one, I do hear a lot of people complain about WA operators not being able to use whistles. I'm here to tell you, some of us can. As a matter of fact, I'm over in Victoria teaching you guys how to use them as well. All right, so you can't throw a wet blanket over everyone and put everyone in the same basket. All right, just because someone's from a particular state doesn't mean that they can't do something. All right. And now, as I said, whistles are a bloody good idea, and they are very helpful in the right situations. Two ways obviously give you the best form of communication, especially when you're working blind, because you can give all that extra information. Speed him up, slow him down, tell him what sort of distances he's got. But when you've got two hands busy, if you're trying to place a motor onto a couple of studs and you've got both hands on that motor, it's a bit hard to try and line up, take your hands off the motor, jump on the two-way, where you can keep the whistle in your mouth. All right, so my advice is, if you don't know how to use it, don't use it. But I would strongly suggest at least get to know them, because they do come in handy. And that goes for all you guys out there in WA as well. I can do it, so can you. All right, they do come in handy. All right. So, and there's going to be plenty of discussion on whistles because it is what it is. All right. So, what license do you need for a 40-ton frenner? All right. I get this quite a lot actually. So, because the first slew crane ticket is a C2 that goes up to 20 tonne, a lot of people make the assumption that the CN license, which is your non-slew crane license, is also restricted to 20 tonne as well. Alright, so with the CN license, there is no restriction on the weight limit, so you can drive a 40 tonne Frenner. Okay, so nice and simple. What license you need for a 40 tonne Frenner? Same as any other Frenner. Alright, but keep in mind, having the license doesn't make you competent. Make sure you do actually get someone to train you in that particular machine. They are different again to the smaller models, so don't just think you can jump in it and train it. Remember, the employer has a duty of care to supply information, training, supervision and instruction. Right? You can't just jump in a crane and go for it. Alright, what license should I get first? Okay, so this one, maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned, but you should always be starting with your dogging license. Okay, now your dogging license is going to be the basis for everything you do after it. Okay, I'm a strong believer, and look, I get it all the time. I get people, they've come in to do a CN license, so they can drive a telehandler that's bigger than 3 tonne. Now, while you may not think that you're going to be jumping into a crane, okay, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, and you've got that license, so don't make assumptions, and it will make getting that CN license a lot easier too if you've done that dogging license first. Okay, we've got another comment here. So what have we got? Is it better to get all your rigging tickets at once, then learn as you go, or take it one step at a time? Okay, so my best advice on that, John, is look, with dogging and basic rigging, because a lot of people will start in the industry throwing up steel or doing something along those lines. No problem at all doing dogging and basic rigging sort of one after the other. All right, now my personal preference, and it's the same way I did it myself, is get some time under the hook before you go for intermediate. All right, when you're doing intermediate rigging, you're going to be doing things such as tilt panels, very dangerous things. All right, they have killed a lot of people over the years. You'll be doing dual crane lifts, which if you're not sure what you're doing, you don't want to be out there trying to direct 2, 3, 4 cranes at once. You'll do demolition, another highly dangerous task, and obviously building cranes as well. And you can imagine how ugly things can get if you're building cranes and you don't have the experience in it. All right, so my best advice with that is definitely get your dogging and basic rigging. Spend some time under the hook. Get to know your signals. Get familiarisation with the cranes, how they move, what they do. Get some industry experience, and then in a year or 2 or 3, all right. Now you've got to remember, you do get paid well, even as a dogger and a basic rigger. So there's no need to rush through these tickets. If you can get a good stable job with a basic rigging ticket, spend the time doing that. Once you've got the experience, then look at getting your intermediate rigging. Okay, and that's always going to be my advice, is try and spend that time sitting under the hook before you rush through all your tickets. One of my biggest pet hates, and I saw this a lot, especially on major projects over west and in Queensland, as well as a lot of mine sites, because I have done a fair bit of variety. I've done general crane hire as well as mines and major projects, etc. But one of my biggest pet hates would have to be 18-year-old advanced riggers. And the big problem with that is some of these companies, they seem to think that an advanced rigger means you're a more experienced rigger. Unfortunately, what you'll find throughout most of this industry is most of the older and experienced blokes don't have an advanced ticket because there's no need for it in construction generally. Right, there are rare circumstances, but it's not that often that you're going to be putting up a swing stage or a gin pole as a rigger. Okay, so if you are in a perhaps working for theatre or on stages, so there may be a call for using span lines, etc. Okay, in those instances, by all means go for advanced, but in general construction, there's not a demand for it. So don't stress, don't waste your money on it until you get into that sort of industry where you may require it. Because you've got to realise most people that do get their rigging tickets are looking at construction, mining, etc. And in saying that, I also do realise I do see quite often jobs advertised for advanced riggers, and you know these jobs and you know they don't need advanced riggers. It's just the HR companies are confusing advanced with experienced. As far as the actual work they do, getting an advanced ticket doesn't teach them any more about the tasks that are actually involved. All they're getting is a bunch of inexperienced people that have gone through, done a bunch of courses, rather than the experienced ones that have got the time under the hook. Right, so just one of my bugbears, the 18-year-old advanced riggers. Spend your time under the hook. Treat it like a long-term goal. Okay, you'll make good money all the way through, so there's no need to rush your tickets. And spend the time under the hook before you ever consider jumping in the seat as well. Okay, so I hope that answers your question anyway. All right. So what else do I have down here? I think some of it might actually lead into that as well. Okay. So, what have we got here? So, hey Kieran, thanks for putting all this out, mate. No worries. Got a question for you in regards to the Frenner. I had to get a CN in Victoria around 2006. That was just about the time of the handover to the Horus licenses. All right. It was a telehandler. Well, it was for a telehandler over 3 tonne from memory. I had a couple of goes on a Frenner, but not enough to feel confident. Have you any contacts in Queensland at all? I can't find any places that do non-slew, just starting people off on C6. Okay. Now, okay. That's another look. My background being in the crane industry most of my working life. I did start out as a shearer, but I moved into the cranes after 6 or 7 years. Learn to drive the Frenner. Just because you've got the opportunity to jump into a C6 and it does cover CV and CN, doesn't mean you should. Okay? They are a completely different machine, and my personal opinion is they should be taken off that hierarchy of licenses as well, and it should be a standalone license, and I am under the belief that that is what WorkSafe are looking at doing too. Alright, so the other issue I have is up until not that long ago, a lot of CN licenses were done using a telehandler. Okay, and thankfully they did change the rules and they can't do that anymore. They've got to use a Frenner, well, a real non-slew crane. Shouldn't typically use a brand, could be a TID, could be a Hummer. Alright, but they are a completely different machine. To be honest with you, non-slew cranes are going to always be a hell of a lot more dangerous than any slew crane. Right, you're working on rubber, you've got a lot more variables, you've got unstable ground, you've got uneven ground, you've got sloping ground, right, you've got swinging loads, right, they are a hell of a lot more dangerous than any slewing crane, alright? So don't go grabbing a slew crane license and think you know how to drive a Frenner. Just because they may not be as big, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be a lot more dangerous, all right? And remember, it's also the employer still has that duty of care to make sure that you're actually trained in any machine you drive. And look, I realise since I did change to the requirement for the Frenner, it is a lot harder to find some companies to train it, but there are some out there. My best advice is just Google it and, well, hopefully you'll find a reliable trainer. All right, now, as far as in Queensland, look, off the top of my head, I don't know if they do have a Frenner, but if I was in Brisbane, and look, it's a long time since I've been up that way, but I do know that Call That Safety down on the Gold Coast were, look, they used to be pretty good and they were honest. Don't know, that I'm going back a number of years. And also, if you're up in the middle of Queensland somewhere, I know that what does he call himself? Pro Lift Training up in Mackay. I know Craig's pretty switched on that owns Pro Lift up there. I don't believe he owns a friend, but I don't know. I could be wrong, but it's always good to have a chat to him and try and find out. Now, what you've also got to look at is what you're driving it for and what state you're in. All right, so if you are looking at a telehandler, and look, I don't know what the rules are in all the different states. I do know in Victoria, if it is above 3 tonne, you do need a non-slew crane licence. Okay, Queensland, I'm not actually sure. You'd have to check on that one because it's a strange thing on the telehandler. Some states cover it under a CN licence and others don't. But if it is 3 tonne or under, you still have to be competent. All right, so, and that all comes down to how the employer wants to deem your competency. Okay. I hope that covers that one. All right, what else do I get here? What license should I get first? I think we just did that one. Okay. Here's one I get quite often as well. How do I get a job in cranes? No easy answer to that one. All right. Be persistent is the only thing I can say. If you're going to look, it depends what sort of area you're going in, but in my personal experience, if you want to be a good rigger, I'd be trying to get into the general crane hire side of things. So try your local crane companies. Now, if you're looking on Seek or any other app trying to wait for them to advertise, I think you're going to be waiting a long time. You'll find most of them got a bunch of where did that go? Right, hang on, I think I lost something there. All right, there we go. All right, so yeah, you'll find most of the crane companies have got a stack of resumes to the ceiling and if not more. Okay, my best advice is get your tickets, try and get some experience wherever you can. I'm not a big fan of labour hire companies, never have been, but it's just the way the world's going nowadays. If that's what you need to do to get experience, do whatever you can. Now, if you do end up going with labour hire companies, and I know they've got a bad name, I'm sure there's good ones out there and there's bad ones out there. Whatever the case may be, if you go to any of these sort of companies and they sort of hire you off to someone else to go do a job, make sure you let the people you're working with know that you're only green, but you're willing to learn. Okay? Now, I know from the other side of things too, companies hire labour hire in to cover shortfalls in whenever they need it. And you find these labour hire companies do send out a lot of very green people that have absolutely no understanding what they're doing. Now, there's no point trying to bluff your way through. It usually takes a 2-minute conversation with someone to decide whether or not they know what they're talking about. And even if you did manage to bluff your way through that bit, it's a very dangerous industry and people can get hurt. All right. So if you're new out there working for a labour hire company, you go to a site, the site don't know what to expect. They might be getting someone with 20 years experience. They might be someone who got their ticket last week. All right. So when you go out there, explain to them that you are only new and ask for help. Right. Don't make the assumptions. If someone asks you to go do something, you're not sure what they're asking, ask them. All right. Don't just nod your head, smile and wander off and try and wing it. Right. Because that's how people tend to get hurt. Okay. All right. Now, as I was saying, back to, sorry, went off on a little sidetrack there. Another thing you can do is, I actually gave this advice to one of my students a few weeks back, and he came into another class last week and told me he just got a job in a crane company. And the only way he did it was he took my advice, he went door knocking, took a bunch of resumes with him, went door knocking, and he was persistent. Right? If he hadn't heard back from him in a couple of weeks, he went around again. It shows them you're keen. All right? If you're just going to send them an email with a resume, all right, it's pretty easy just to reject it. They see, I can guarantee you, that they're going to be getting resumes every single day. If you're showing up at the door with the resume in hand, showing that you're keen, I know which one I'd rather hire. That'd be the guy that's gone to the effort, coming around, he's persistent, he shows he wants it, and that he's keen. All right? So that's my best advice. I can't really tell you too much more about that. Just keep at it. All right. So I'm just out of questions. I did get quite a few more there, but those ones sort of summed up the majority of what they're all sort of aiming at. So if anyone else out there has any other questions, now's the time to jump up. Okay. So any questions about licensing in particular, I'd be happy to answer. If you're currently doing a license, you need to know anything, you're nervous about it, what to expect, anything along those lines. All right, maybe not. Okay. Okay. All right. So, actually, I will just bring up on this other screen one thing that I'd like to. Where are we? I know I'm not looking at the camera, but I'll be back in a sec. I'll just find what I'm looking for. Okay, where are we? Just a comment I got on LinkedIn, which I found rather funny. Okay, it just came through earlier today, if I can find it. Okay. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's go back again. Alright, here we go. So I'll leave the names out of this, but I'll just post this over here and we'll have a look. Alright. So we're looking at a video I did about easy way to put the chain slings onto the hook. So great demo, Kieran, but here in Australia, I love that. I don't think they realise where I'm from. Okay, mandatory riggers gloves and different hand signifiers for up and down. No gloves, no lift. Okay, now another thing that does sort of get to me once in a while, especially if you do get a lot of people, they've worked on these major projects, go for a number of years. While they're there, that's where they start getting their dogging, their rigging. And you do get different sites that do have different rules. Now, for example, you'll get some sites that will say a tagline has to be on every load. Right? You will get some sites that say gloves must be worn if you're outside of the crib room. Okay, that does not mean it is mandatory everywhere in Australia. All right, you've got to learn the difference between site rules and regulations, because what you'll find is if you believe site rules are the actual rules, you're going to get left behind. All right. Now, my personal experience is a lot of site rules can be knee-jerk reactions to incidents that have happened. They've usually been put in place by people that don't understand the industry, don't understand what the actual problem was, and some of those times these new rules they bring in can actually be more dangerous. All right, one of my biggest ones is there's a lot of sites now that will tell their people they are not allowed to put their hand on the load. I cannot think of anything more dangerous personally. All right, before I go any more about that one, what do we got here? G'day mate, firstly thanks for all your help getting my doggies. Okay, Sinful Unger. All right. Obviously a previous student. Okay, my doggy's curious as to know how much harder the basic riggers course is. All right, so basic rigging and dogging. So there's actually, if you can get through dogging, you can get through basic rigging. And if you're who I think I am, you did the dogging on the older course with some of the more complex calculations. Basic rigging is pretty simple. There's quite a bit of new terminology in the basic rigging. But once you get your head around the basic rigging, it is quite simple. Now, another big difference between the two courses is when you're doing dogging, when you do the practical assessment, you don't do it as an individual. When you're doing the basic rigging, you do the practical assessment as a team. Now, in saying that, even though you're working as a team, you are still assessed individually. All right, so you can't sit back and think that everyone else is going to do the work for you, because if you are, you can just as easily fail as doing it on your own. But look, the one thing I'll say about all of these courses, it does get harder as you get into the cranes, and that's to do with the volume of learning you have to do over a short period of time. But very similar between dogging and rigging. The calculations, you did the old dogging, so the calculations are actually probably a little bit simpler than what you did in the dogging. If you've done the new dogging, well, they might be a little bit more difficult. Either way, it is just a bunch of formulas. Used to be 5 formulas, now it's 4 formulas. All you need to do is, once you remember the formula, all you need to do is put the numbers underneath, jump on a calculator, and answer the question. All right, so it's pretty simple maths. It's just a matter of remembering the formula. And if you do have a problem remembering the formulas, my advice, jump onto my basic rigging calculations, watch it through a couple of times, write the formulas down, memorize those formulas, write them out 50 times if you have to, in order, get them in your head, and you'll find it's going to be a breeze. Now, with the practical side, what you do in the practical side, okay, you need to do a bit of steel work, so you'll put up a portal frame, okay, you'll set up a winch, you'll lift some precast panels, set up a static line, set up a safety net, and install safety shutters and install a CCLP. So it sounds like a lot, but you are working together as a team, and if you work confidently and talk to each other, which the whole thing about rigging is, especially when you're doing steelwork, it's all about teamwork. So it's a good introduction to that working together and learning to communicate with each other. Okay, so hope that helps. I do have a couple of videos on the rigging, particularly on some of the terminology and the basic rigging calculations as well. And don't forget the knots. Everyone loves doing the knots. It's actually the first videos I did, because that's what most people seem to struggle with. All right, so that's the reason I did them, was so they could go home and try and practice doing those knots while I wasn't around. All right, so hope that helps. Okay, now I forgot what I was talking about. What was I talking about? Okay, let me see. I was talking about, where am I? Not that one. No, lost it. No, there you go. I know what I was looking for. Just come back over here. All right. Now, what was I talking about? Site rules as opposed to regulations. All right, yeah. So, one of my biggest bugbears is when you're on a site and it tells you are not allowed to put your hands on a load. More dangerous than anything I can imagine. Okay. All right, something's beeping at me. Just let me have a quick look here. What do we got? Nope, not that. Okay. No idea. Something's buzzing. I'm sure we'll figure it out somewhere, hopefully. Alright. So that's the end of those questions there. So let's just close. Let's go back to here, shall we? Alright. Now, when we're talking about the difference between site rules and regulations, you've got to remember there is a difference, and you've got to learn that you're not going to always come across the same rules. My advice, I would always, I'll give it a show. Okay, let's have a look. Two best friends. Get to know this one, unless you're in the rest of Australia, I should say. Get to know your WHS. All right, and where are we? The Act. All right. So in Victoria, get to know the OHS and OHS Act and regulations. Pretty much anywhere else in Australia, WHS. All right. It's always good to know them. All right. Now, my issue with this knee-jerk reactions, all right, is they do make a job a lot more dangerous. Okay? Not putting your hands on a load. Rather than tell people that, if you're having an incident, all right, look, if you're responsible for safety on site and there's an incident, all right, talk to other people in that industry, not just the operations manager or superintendents, okay? They may not necessarily have the ground level experience. Get some people off the ground and have a chat about it, all right? Sites where you do things such as ban soft slings, here's an idea. Don't ban the equipment. Train people to use it properly. It is very good equipment. Same as sites, I see them banning franners. All right. Now, all you're going to do there is introduce a lot more hazards. Train people to use them properly. Okay. Two biggest causes for accidents are going to be poorly trained people, which you can do something about, or you have people with cowboy attitudes. All right. Now, if they've got a cowboy attitude, I would say sack them. All right. You don't need people with those attitudes in this industry. Okay. Now, if they haven't been trained properly, all right, remember, it's your role as a employer to suitably train and instruct your employees. Sending them off to do a 5-day course or a 4-day course, whatever the case may be, wherever you are, that is going to train them to get the license. It's not going to train them to be competent. The only thing that makes somebody competent is time under the hook. Okay? And that's not time under the hook by themselves. That's time under the hook with experienced people. So if you've just trained somebody, put in with your more experienced riggers who have the right attitude, and they can help them, and they can help them train the people. All right, and you'll find you'll have a lot more success than just banning equipment. Okay, so I was talking to a student recently who was on a site. They banned franners on the site, and they're using large telehandlers to do what a franner should be doing. Okay, so all they're doing is putting themselves at risk more because it's not the right machine for the right job. Okay, same as soft slings. They have a purpose and they are good things and handy things. And I would rather be using a big soft sling than a set of 32mm chains if I can avoid it. Okay, so how are we looking? Well, we've gone for a fair bit now and there doesn't seem to be too many questions on board. So what we'll do, I'll hang around for another 5 or 10 minutes, and if we don't get any more questions, might have to call it a night. All right. So here's your chance. If you have anything to say, now's the time to jump on board. Okay. All right. Okay. So Well, we'll wait and see if any more questions turn up. Another question I do quite commonly get, it's just sprung to my mind, is I do get a lot of people. I'll just ignore that phone call for a minute. Hang on one moment. Nope, nope. Okay. That's right. I just got distracted. Don't even remember what I was talking about. Okay. No, sorry, I just got distracted there. I just did get sent by a text message from a previous student. Don't know why they can't jump online or they don't want to put it up. All right, maybe this is the reason for the question. My supervisor asked me to do something I don't think is safe. Who can I call to check it with? Okay, now this is one thing that is going to come across a lot, especially in the cranes. You can get pushed a lot of times to do things that you probably shouldn't. Some supervisors think they know more about cranes than what they actually do. All right, now my advice, now this is generally a question gets asked more from riggers rather than crane operators, and the reason I say that is because most crane operators, they should have spent quite a bit of time under the hook, and they are a lot more experienced in the field. Okay, now the reason the riggers come up with it, they may be new to the industry, they're not sure when they're being pushed to do something they shouldn't. A good example might be doing form work and you know it's too windy. All right. A supervisor might say, oh, this crane is good for 11.1 metres a second and it's only a couple hundred kilos, but what you've got to take into account is the size of that. Now, if you're new to this and the supervisor's saying you've got to get it done, you've got to get it done, you've got to get it done, the short answer is no, you don't. Now, if you feel you're being pushed, my best advice, tell the crane operator. Okay, he might be working blind, he may have no idea what's going on there. All right, if you can't control the load, the crane driver may not feel it as much, but you're hanging off the side trying to hang on to this tagline. If you can't control the load and the supervisor is still pushing you to do it, jump on the two-way or stop the job, walk down and have a chat to the crane operator. If you're nervous about stopping the job, the crane driver shouldn't be. It's his role to look after you as well as the crane. All right, you work together in a team. If it's too windy, the crane operator should well and truly pull it up. If there's lightning about, there's another one that the crane driver should pull up. All right, don't be nervous, talk to the crane driver. If you're in the unfortunate situation where you're both green or you're both nervous, every site should have a safety officer. Go to them. If they don't do anything about it, go to the big boss on site. You'll find the higher you go, the more people will typically care about it. It's more the middle management you tend to have a bit of a problem with. All right, but hopefully you're never stuck in the situation where you're both on the site and both green. All right. Sorry, I just came to me when we were talking about the lightning. I do remember one supervisor telling me I was in a what was I in? 220 Grove. No, I wasn't. I was in the 130 Grove with full stick out, 130 ton Grove, 60 metres stick out. Saw some lightning coming across, started pulling the boom in. Supervisor said, "Oh, what are you doing? It's only sheet lighting. That's not going to affect you." When I say no, I mean no. All right. Now, like I said, if you're not sure who to ask and you're green under the hook, go talk to the crane driver, and the crane driver should be able to back you up. And if not, if you're both green and you don't want to say you're afraid of losing the job, go higher. Go higher, go higher, go higher. Go high enough, somebody will care. All right. And if a supervisor is telling you to do something that's dangerous, they need to be sacking that supervisor. All right, it's his role to look after you as well. All right, and I do know it's not always the same out there. Usually, the smaller the jobs, the harder it is to get someone. But as you get more experience and more time under the hook, you do get more confident as well. Okay, what do we got down here? Okay, so Alexis Jones. How much difference is there between mine site rules and construction site rules? Well, good question. That depends entirely on, basically, I won't say the mine site. You'll find a lot of them are pretty much the same, but the construction site is going to depend a lot on what type of construction site. Now, if you're on a major project, you're going to find it's going to have all very similar rules, all over-regulated. And I say over-regulated because a lot of them do have those rules that I may not necessarily agree with. I'm sure they've got their reasons. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them. All right. So all your big projects are going to have pretty much similar rules to the mine sites. However, you'll find as the projects get smaller, so do the rules. All right. Now, remember, it's your duty of care to work safely. Just because, let's say you're on a residential site with a couple of, let's say, roofers that are doing a few dodgy things, you rock up there to throw some sheets up for them. It doesn't mean that you have to as well. All right. If they start complaining, and trust me, they will. If they're complaining it's taking you too long to fill in the paperwork, to put on your harness, to find somewhere to attach to, who cares? They're paying for you regardless. All right. Just because they're walking the trusses doesn't mean you should. All right. Remember, you're just as responsible for your own safety as anyone else. Okay. So when it comes down to it, the difference between the rules all comes down to what site. I shouldn't really say what size site, because you do get some small sites that do actually respect their employees and look after them. But you're always going to come across those dodgy ones as well. Now, if you are, remember, you're just as responsible for you as anybody else is. Okay. All right. So, I think that's just about time to wrap it up. What are we looking at? So, I hope you've all got something out of it. Okay, and we'll maybe, hopefully, do this again sometime in the near future. All right, so I might even put a poll up soon, and if you're interested in doing a few more of these, let you decide. Okay, thanks for your time. Cheers, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Okay, and stop streaming.